Inshallah ta'ala, we will start by having a sincere intention, seeking a reward from Allah ta'ala. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. The Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam mentioned in a hadith, إن الناس إذا رأوا المنكر فلم ينكروه أوشك أن يعمهم الله بعقاب. This hadith means that if people left out forbidding the unlawful, Allah Ta'ala may send torture on them in this life before the hereafter. And we are seeing nowadays that many people are inflicted with hardships, and many Muslims are inflicted with hardships. And remember, when the Muslim is inflicted with hardships, this does not mean that he has a bad status. It does not mean that. When the believer is inflicted with hardship, it is said that he will either have some of his sins erased or his level will be raised. So actually, many pious people used to be happy when they were inflicted with hardships, because on top of that, when the Muslim is inflicted with a hardship, regardless of whether this calamity is small or big, and when the believer is patient with this calamity, he or she does not object to the will of Allah. Rather, this person is patient, this believer is patient. Allah Ta'ala rewards him for this. So when we are troubled, when we have difficulties, and we are patient, sincerely seeking reward from Allah, Allah Ta'ala rewards this person. So when the Muslim has difficulties, bala, calamities, it does not necessarily mean that he is not a good person, no. But in this hadith that I previously mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when people leave out forbidding the unlawful, that they may be that Allah Ta'ala may send on them calamities, torture in this life before the hereafter. So then what should we do? We are to forbid the unlawful. When we see unlawful happening and we can forbid it, we should forbid the unlawful. And many times when people leave out forbidding the unlawful, it spreads more. And those people who are committing the sins, they continue committing sins because nobody is stopping them. So they continue. They don't feel shy about committing sins. Whereas actually the person who is committing the sin, this person should be ashamed of himself. The person who commits a sin, he should be ashamed of himself. But nowadays we're living in times where many people are committing sins publicly. They're doing that and they're showing off. They're not feeling any shame by that. And many people don't even tell them anything. And we are seeing how many Muslims have a lot of calamities nowadays. So what should we do is when we are able, we should forbid the unlawful that is happening wisely, forbid it in a wise way so that the one who is committing it stops doing it. And when we are faced with difficulties, we should be patient and never object to the will of Allah Ta'ala. Now, inshallah, we will continue with the lessons where we stopped. And I will try to share the screen with you. And if you do not have this book, inshallah, I can send it to you afterwards. Inshallah, we will be continuing with lesson 5. So, in our lesson today, we will be talking about a very important matter, which the scholars said that the accountable person is obligated to learn that. That is the 13 attributes of Allah Ta'ala. Inshallah, I will go over them. I will explain them briefly, and we will review them together. And Allah Ta'ala is attributed with many attributes. And the scholars said that these 13 attributes, which we will talk about, the accountable person is obligated to know them. As Allah Ta'ala, His existence has no beginning and no end, also the attributes of Allah have no beginning and no end. So the attributes that we will mention now, they have no beginning and no end, and they do not change. So among these 13 attributes is existence. It is obligatory to believe that Allah Ta'ala exists. The Muslim does not doubt in the existence of Allah at all. The Muslim believes in the existence of Allah. Allah Ta'ala exists without a beginning and without an end. And Allah Ta'ala, He is the creator of all the creation. So He existed before creating all the creation, before creating the earth, before creating the skies, before creating the directions. So Allah Ta'ala existed without a place before He created the whole universe. And God does not change. So after creating all places and directions, Allah exists without a place. He does not need any of His creation. He does not need the sky. He does not need earth. He does not need any direction. Our Lord exists without a place. We said that whatever is in a place has a volume, which means it is created. And God is not created. He is the creator. So then the belief of all Muslims is that Allah Ta'ala exists without a place. He is not in the sky. And we will talk, inshallah ta'ala, later on more about the angels. The angels, they are the residents of the skies. Also, among the attributes of Allah that the accountable person has to know is oneness. What we mean by oneness here is that Allah Ta'ala does not have partners to Him in Godhood. He does not have a partner to Him in Godhood. Okay, oneness here does not mean the number one. No, because number one we can add to it, we can divide it. So what is meant here is not number one. Rather, it means that Allah Ta'ala does not have partners to Him in Godhood. And the attributes of Allah are not like the attributes of the creations. Our attributes change. Our attributes change, but the attributes of Allah do not change. Our attributes have a beginning, but the attributes of Allah do not have a beginning and no end. Also among the attributes of Allah is eternity. This means that the existence of Allah has no beginning. And among His attributes is everlastingness. This means that the existence of Allah has no end. Our existence eventually will have an end when we die and the soul leaves the body, and then the soul returns to the body, and you know that the day of judgment will come and people will be resurrected from their graves, and the Muslims, they will be in paradise forever. And the non-believers, they will be in hellfire forever. Those who died as accountable and they died having a belief other than Islam, they will be in hellfire forever. Also among the attributes of Allah Ta'ala is non-needness of the creation. So Allah Ta'ala does not need any of His creation. God created us and He is not in need of us. We need Allah, we need the mercy of Allah, but God does not need His creation. Also, among the attributes of Allah is power. God has power over everything. And Allah is attributed with will. The will of Allah, as we said, as all of His attributes, it does not change, it has no beginning and no end. Whatever Allah Ta'ala will to be, it will be. And whatever Allah did not will to be, shall not be. So when the Muslim always remembers that and the Muslim relies on Allah, things will become a bit easier on him or her, particularly when we are faced with difficulties. And we remember that everything that is happening happens by the will of Allah. Everything that is happening is because Allah Ta'ala created it. So when the person is harmed by the non-believers, when somebody commits injustice to the believer, the person remembers when this is happening, it means Allah willed for it to happen. It means God created that. For everything that comes into existence is created by Allah. So the person relies on Allah. He knows that Allah Ta'ala willed that. And we should rely on Allah and we say, Hasbunallah, Allah Ta'ala suffices us. We do not object to Allah. God is not attributed with injustice. We should always know that Allah is not attributed with injustice. He does whatever He wills with what He owns, and Allah Ta'ala owns us. So we rely on Allah, we should be patient. Allah Ta'ala is merciful with the believers. Allah Ta'ala is merciful to the believers in this life and in the hereafter. And as I told you, when the believer is patient with difficulties, inshallah, he is rewarded for that, subhanallah. So everything happens by the will of Allah, and the will of Allah does not change. Allah Ta'ala is attributed with knowledge. Allah knows about things before they happen. Nothing is hidden from the knowledge of Allah. When the person is all by himself, all left alone, deserted from other people, Allah knows about him. Allah knows what we are feeling. Allah knows what is in our hearts. So when somebody, again, commits injustice to a believer, Allah knows about that. Even if other people do not believe the victim, Allah knows who the victim is and who the oppressor is. So Allah Ta'ala knows about everything, and the knowledge of Allah does not increase nor decrease. It does not change. And we said that Allah Ta'ala is not like His creation. So Allah Ta'ala does not resemble us. We have a body, Allah does not have a body. Okay, we have body parts, Allah is not attributed with these. So Muslims believe that Allah hears all what can be heard. And so we know that Allah hears without ears, because we said that God does not resemble His creation. So for sure, then we know that God does not have ears. He hears without ears. So when the person is all by himself, whether we whisper when we make dua, whether we raise our voices when we make dua, Allah Ta'ala hears us. Allah knows about us and Allah Ta'ala hears us. Allah Ta'ala is attributed with sight. And as we said, Allah Ta'ala does not resemble His creation, so Allah Ta'ala does not have eyes. Eyes are created. So Allah Ta'ala sees without eyes. Allah sees without eyes and hears without ears. Allah Ta'ala sees everything that can be seen without the need of any instrument. Also, among the attributes of Allah Ta'ala that the scholars said the accountable person should know is life. Allah Ta'ala is attributed with life, for Allah Ta'ala is alive and He does not die. The life of Allah is not with a soul. It's not with flesh, it's not with blood. All these are created. So Allah is not attributed with these. The life of Allah is not like ours. It is not with soul, not with blood, not with flesh. Now, I told you earlier that when we die, the soul departs our body and then it returns to the body when the person is put in the grave. The soul is something that we usually do not see. It is inside of us, but we know that we have a soul because this is what Islam teaches us. And when the person dies, the soul leaves the body. So Allah Ta'ala is attributed with life, which is not like our life, and Allah Ta'ala is attributed with non-resemblance to the creation. And this is also among the fundamentals of the belief. So the Muslim believes that God is not like his creation at all. He does not resemble us. He created us and he is not like us. So when we look at ourselves and we see that we are attributed with a specific color, with a specific texture, with a specific size, tone, all these are attributes of the creation, and God is not attributed with any of these. So we always remember that the Lord is not like his creation at all. Now, the last attribute that I will mention, which is the 13th attribute of Allah, which the accountable person should know, is speech. So, of course, we know then that the speech of Allah is not like ours. You and I, we speak with languages. Languages are created. God created them. You and I, we speak by moving our lips. Lips are created. We use our tongue. Tongues are created. There's a voice that comes out when we speak. Voices are created. Sounds are created. We use letters to communicate. These are all created. Letters, words, languages, sounds, all these are created. God created them, and He is not like His creation. So the speech of Allah is not with a language, not with sounds, not with letters. The speech of Allah has no beginning and no end. It does not have interruptions. Now I was speaking, then I stopped for a moment. This is our speech. It starts and it ends. The speech of Allah does not have interruptions. It has no beginning and no end. The Muslim knows that we do not imagine Allah. Allah is not imagined in the minds, because whatever we imagine is something that is created. This is what we imagine. We imagine created things, things that have a shape, that have a size, that have a volume, that are in a place. So we imagine created things. Allah, the Lord, is not imagined in the mind. God is not like us. This belief, having the proper belief, is the greatest blessing that the person can have in this life. Having the proper belief. This is the greatest blessing that the person can have in this life, because whatever difficulties we go through in this life, which is anyways short, no matter how long we live, it is short compared to the hereafter and compared to our time in the grave as well. This life is short. So when the person has the proper belief, no matter how many difficulties we go through, no matter how much injustice is being done to the believer, eventually he will find everlasting enjoyment in paradise. Everlasting, if he died having the proper belief. So you should always protect your belief. This is a great blessing that we have. Whereas the person who is committing injustice, if he is a non-believer, he is losing in this life and in the hereafter. And we can see that. we can see that many of the people who are committing injustice, they might feel happy for a period of time, but in reality, they are losers. They lose in this life, and in the hereafter, they are enormous losers when they will be in hellfire forever if they died and they were accountable and died on a belief other than Islam. So, inshallah ta'ala, we protect our belief from what takes the person out of Islam. Inshallah ta'ala, in our upcoming lessons, we will talk more about that. As I told you in the beginning of our lesson, I would like these lessons to be a little bit where you also communicate and contribute by participating and answering some revision questions at the end of each lesson, inshallah, so that we know it is clear and you're benefiting, and inshallah, you will share this information with others as well. Because really, we want to learn to help ourselves in this life, and we want what is good for others as well. So we want to spread the teachings of the Prophet alayhi salam. I started the lesson today by the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salam, in which we understand that we need to forbid the unlawful. So we need to also spread the lawful. We forbid the unlawful, and we need to spread the true teachings of Islam. Let us review together. And whoever wants to participate, feel free, to raise your hand, and then you can share with us. So Allah Ta'ala is attributed with many attributes. The scholars said that the accountable person is obligated to know how many attributes of Allah. Who wants to tell us?
13.
13, yes. Allah Ta'ala is attributed with more than these, okay? But these 13 attributes, the accountable person has to know them. Because if somebody hesitates about these 13 attributes, the person would not be a Muslim. The Muslim believes firmly in these attributes. Now, in this lesson, I'm not going to ask you about who the accountable person is. We spoke about this in many lessons, and inshallah, you will review these. Who can tell us what is meant with oneness? When we say Allah is attributed with oneness, what is meant with oneness here? And I remind you, brothers and sisters, since this is religious knowledge, we only answer when we are 100% sure of our answer, okay? So I mentioned today in the lesson what is meant with oneness here. I will remind you, I said it does not mean number one. So what is meant with oneness? Who remembers?
Allah is one without a partner.
Yes, it means Allah does not have partners to him in Godhood. Allah Ta'ala yubariku bika. Allah Ta'ala bless you. Okay.
May Allah bless you too.
Ameen. Okay, what can you tell us about the attribute of will? In Arabic, we say al-mashi'ah or al-irada. We mentioned something today about the attribute of will of Allah.
Whatever Allah will to be shall be, and
Yes.
whatever Allah did not will to be shall not be.
MashaAllah, Allah yahfazuka. Yes, exactly. And we said that the will of Allah, as all of his attributes, it does not change. And the believer relies on Allah and does not object to the will of Allah. And I will advise you of something. Always try to prepare yourself for a difficulty that might come, because often difficulties come suddenly, unexpected. Often calamities might fall on the person when we don't expect them. So when we strengthen our belief by always learning and being obedient to Allah Ta'ala and relying on Allah, so when the difficulty comes, so then we receive it, inshallah ta'ala, with patience. Okay, I will ask a last question, inshallah. Okay, what have you learned in our lesson today about the attribute of speech of Allah? Can you mention one matter that we mentioned that pertains to the attribute of speech of Allah? This is very important to understand well.
Allah is attributed with speech, but it's not like a language,
Yes.
letter, or sound.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Yes, the speech of Allah is not with a language, not with words, not with letters. It has no beginning and no end, and it does not change. Barakallahu bika. Okay, inshallah ta'ala, we will end our lesson here.